All right, if you'll take your copy of Scripture and turn to Judges chapter 11, we're going to pick up where we left off last week, talking about Jephthah. He's the ninth judge. We're going to go back a little bit and cover a couple of things that we covered last week, but just to kind of get us back all on the same page. We won't spend a lot of time on that. Just to kind of get you reconnected with where we are. So we left off with Abimelech. He's the son of Gideon. And Abimelech was not really a judge. He was more of a crime lord. And the Israelites suffered under him for a lot of years on top of oppression and all these kind of things. Well, then after that happens, they had peace. And then the Ammonites and different groups began to oppress them again. And we have Jephthah that comes as a judge. Now, as we look at this, as we go back to kind of read a little bit, Jephthah was a very unlikely judge. The people in his town had rejected him, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He really isn't looking to judge or to be a leader of Israel or to be, God's appointed man. What he really cares about is being the king of his tribe. And, that's kind of in the deal that he makes with his tribe that, listen, if I'll come and I'll help you, then I'm going to be king over you. And what we're going to see is, and this is the difficult thing, we see it from the people and we see it from the judges, we see it from the people who step in and fight for them. They're really flawed people. And one of the things that, we should see in this is that God uses flawed people. I don't know that any of us, if we knew the pedigree of each one of these people, would say, that's the guy that I want fighting for me, Gideon definitely wouldn't have fit that category. Abimelech definitely wouldn't have fit that category. Most of the judges here don't. And so one of the things we have to understand is that God uses flawed people, but God doesn't condone what they do. And one of the things that we're going to see a lot tonight and through the rest of the book of Judges that we need to remember, just because the Bible contains something doesn't mean it condones it. There are lots of things that happen in the Bible that God does not condone, that God does not approve of, that God's not happy about. But in telling the story of humanity, he has to include it. So there are things like murder and rape and incest and, child sacrifice and all these just immoral and horrible and hideous things. And some of that's even done by the people who claim to love and follow God. And so one of the things we have to do when we come to God's word is understand who God is and his character and his nature, that he does not allow these things. He does not want these things to happen. But just because it's in the Bible contains it, doesn't mean the Bible condones it. And you're going to see that tonight. There's a very famous thing that happens with Jephthah right before he goes to fight for his people. He makes a vow to God. And it's a really stupid vow, and we'll talk about why it's stupid and why we shouldn't take that practice in ourselves. But we'll see that. And so what we need to see is you have very flawed people who have a very mixed up religious experience. And what I mean by that is they take a little bit from God and a little bit from this God and a little bit from this God, a little bit from this God, a little bit from this God, and they try to create their own religion and then say, well, this is how we worship God. It's kind of what we do now. And here's the deal. God's not happy with that. God does not condone that. God does not say, well, that's okay. If you worship me a little bit, you can worship Baal, you can worship Asherah, you can worship all these. He's not cool with that. But that's what we try to do. To make God, put him in a box where we can handle him, we can control him, we can manipulate him. And I hope what you're seeing as we go through this is that God is not manipulated. God is not controlled. And God cannot be put in a box. And I think also what we need to see as we go through this each week is we look at how terrible the people are and the awful decisions that they make and the terrible people that they choose to be their representative or to be their king, and yet we see the goodness and the graciousness of God every time. So we're going to be in chapter 11, so we've done 10 chapters. How many times has God delivered Israel in this book? 10 chapters, so 10 times. Actually, it's a little bit more than that because we had some judges in there that were kind of short. God delivered. But here's the reality. One of the things that you need to take from this book is, it's humanity's bad. These people are bad. They're messed up lives. But the thing that we can count on in every chapter is going to be this. God is going to deliver. God's going to be gracious. God's going to be kind. But he's also going to be just. And we've talked about that a couple of weeks before, that there's no problem with God's love and God's justice. They're both perfect. They both work together. One doesn't fight the other. He's not one more than the other. He's both. And here's the crazy thing that's hard for us to get. Even in God's justice, it's loving, it's kind, and it's gracious. That's the reality. So I say all that to kind of put us back together to where we are tonight, and we're going to meet the ninth judge, Jephthah. We kind of got to him last week, but I wanted to kind of come back and just make sure we're all on the same page. So let's look in Judges chapter 11, and as always, if you have questions or comments or want to discuss, just stop me. That's what we're here for. Now, Jephthah the Gileadite was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you're the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers, lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows gathered themselves about Jephthah, and they went out with him. It came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, and when the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to Jephthah, "Come and be our chief, that we may fight against the sons of Ammon." Jephthah said to the elders, "Did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why have you come now to me when you're in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "For this reason we have now returned to you, that you may go with us and fight the sons of Ammon and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord is witness between us. Surely we will do as you have said." Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead. The people made him head and chief over them, and Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So here's the problem. The people of Gilead are being attacked by the people of Ammon, and this is a long-standing feud. We'll get to this in a minute, but this is a generational feud between the Ammonites and the Gileadites. But they've been oppressing them, doing them exactly what all these other tribes have been doing before. They come in, they oppress, they take their stuff and all these kind of things because of the sin of these people. So these people decided, hey, we need somebody to help us. Now notice, they didn't pray to God and say, "God, we want you to rescue us." They didn't say, "God, we know that you've been appointing judges to help us and deliver us. Will you send us a judge?" They don't do that. Sounds like they had a town meeting and said, "Does anybody have any ideas of anybody that could help us? Anybody know anybody?" And somebody, yeah.
But why, would they pick him? Is he big, strong, looks good looking?
Yeah, we're going to get to that. He's a valiant warrior. That's what it says in verse 1. He's a valiant warrior.
He was mean as a junkyard dog.
Probably. Yeah, probably. But here's the thing. They decided to make a decision based on, as a committee decision. They didn't pray about it, didn't talk to God about it. They just decided. And so, they're starting to talk about, what kind of person would we need? And we need somebody that can fight. And maybe we need somebody that's mean and nasty. And then as they kind of began to list all the qualities of a mean, nasty, terrible person that could come fight for them, somebody said, "Oh, I know, Jephthah. You remember that guy? That fits everything." So they go to get him. Now, here's the thing. What we get in the first verse is we hear that Jephthah, he was a valiant warrior. That's good to start with. But he was the son of a harlot. Compliment, diss, right? Right here. And Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you're of another woman." And Jephthah fled. He left and went to another place. Now, here's the thing. Why is it such a big deal that he was the son of a prostitute? It was a big deal because these people, like a lot of people, they have religious convictions that don't really ever show up in their life. And so they had a religious conviction that, having a son by a harlot, that's a bad thing. But it's funny how flexible morals are, right? These people had no problem kicking this child out, and we don't know how old he was when he left, but, he may have been a child, he may have been a teenager, we don't know. But they had no problem telling this guy in front of the entire town, "You have no inheritance, you're not our brother, you're not part of our family, get out." Now, had Jephthah done anything wrong? Had Jephthah sinned against the family? No, their dad did. And I think what's happening here is that they were ashamed of their father's sin, and they wanted to cover it up. Can you imagine growing up in a small town? Your dad, the town's named after your dad, right? And your dad sleeps with a prostitute, and now you have this other brother. Don't you think in a small town that got talked about a lot? Go to the grocery store, and it's like, oh, look at here. Look, it's Gilead's family. And look at old Jephthah over there. We know who your mom is. Kids at school. We know that kid's not your real brother. We know what his mom does. We know what your dad did. And probably what happens, I got sick and tired of hearing that, right? I mean, isn't that natural when we all get sick and tired of hearing that?
If they did that, you think Jephthah might have busted some noses?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, who knows? But so here's what happens. They're ashamed of their father's sin, and so they decide to sin against Jephthah. And this is the thing that we need to see. This is what muddies the water here. These are people who are supposed to be God's people, who follow God's law, who worship God, and yet when the opportunity comes to show kindness and compassion and love, which is what God would do, they say no. No. We're ashamed, and we're ashamed of you, and you got to go. So they push him out. They treat him terribly. And here's the thing. Now, I don't want to make this too much, but I think what you can read into this is that they were offended because they were so good. We're so good that this offends us, and we have to stamp it out. Now, here's the problem. When our goodness becomes the standard by which we judge other people. Because the Bible talks about our goodness. What does the Bible say about our goodness?
Filthy rags.
Filthy rags. And here's a little, this is just a little extra for you. This is not going to cost you anything extra. Why does the Bible tell us not to judge other people? Yeah, we have no leg to stand on. And here's what happens. This is what makes this situation so crazy. Here are people committing open sin, accusing someone of sin that they didn't commit, using that as the reason they're going to get rid of him, and they feel justified in doing it. Not only do they feel justified in doing it, we're fighting for God. We have to protect God's reputation. God don't need us to protect his reputation. He's really good at doing it on his own. But that's what we do. Now, this changes the track of Jephthah's life. We talked about this last week. He runs off to another city, and in the city, he finds worthless people. Now, I told you that there's two possible translations to what that means. One is that it was really worthless people, like a gang, like the people that nobody wants around, that, are just the worst of the worst of the worst. And, he feels at home there because that's how he's been treated. So he joins a gang, and these guys go together and begin to fight and do all these kind of things, and he gets a reputation. Now, they say he's valiant. He's a valiant warrior, but he gets a reputation of being around worthless people. And here's the thing. If you're going to fight against people who have no morals and no values and are willing to do anything to you, what kind of person do you want fighting for you? Somebody who's worthless like this. Somebody who's not going to flinch at doing the hard thing and doing probably some illegal underhanded things. So that's one interpretation. The other one is these are polar opposite, that what this means is people who are outcast, that have been disregarded by society. They're not a gang. They're just kind of the people that nobody want to be around. And so he becomes part of that, like as a ministry. Like, you've been hurt. I've been hurt too. Let's join together. So we're not really sure, but we do know that he made a name for himself in battle. And so again, they're talking around the table. Who can we get? Who can we get? And they start listing off the qualities and say, oh yeah, Japheth, let's call that guy, right? So they go to meet him. Now, the funny thing is, they want nothing to do with him until they need him. Again, this shows their moral center and their moral character. Not once did anybody think, hey, that's really bad what we did to him. Not once do we hear the brothers have any kind of remorse or have any kind of, problem with their conscience and said, hey, we really shouldn't have done that. To go back to him and say, we're sorry, will you come home? That's not what they do. In fact, what we see here is this entire city doesn't think of the boy ever again until they get in trouble. And then it's almost like they get in trouble and they have these people and it's like, hey, I've been hearing stories about old Jephthah. I've been hearing how he's a great fighter. He's a great warrior. Like maybe we need to go get him. Let's go talk to him. Yeah, that's a great idea. Now here's the thing. I would like to have been in that meeting to listen to see if anybody would go, hey, do you remember what we did to him? Has anybody thought about that? Like, we're just going to show up at this guy's house and say, you need to come fight for us? Probably not going to go well. So here's what happens. They go to him and say, we want you. Now look at what Gideon says to them. They say, come be our chief, verse 6, that we may fight against the sons of Ammon. Now, I love how all of a sudden it's now we. Remember, it was just you, you're the son of a prostitute. You're not going to get an inheritance. You're not a part of this family. Now it's we. We're going to fight together. We're going to be a people. We're going to do this. And in reality, what were they really wanting? They didn't really want to fight. What did they want? They wanted Jephthah and his people to come and fight for them. So they say, come and do this. And so we can do this. Jephthah said to the elders, did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? Good question. Good question. Notice they don't have an answer for that. Why are you coming to me now when you are in trouble? Do you get what he's asking them there? Hey, when I was in trouble, where were you? Oh, wait, you were the ones that put me in the trouble. You were the ones that kept me in the trouble. You're the ones that ran me out saying that I was in trouble. Now, why do you want me to come? Now, look, they don't touch this with a 10-foot pole. Instead, they do what people do when they're desperate, and they do what people do when they want to win somebody over. What's the best thing you can think of? Flattery. Exactly right. Here's what they said. Verse 8. For this reason, we've now returned to you, that you may go with us, and you may fight the sons of Ammon and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Think about this for a second. You have a child who's born into a family that doesn't want him. His father is the founder of the town, the most well-known person in the town. He's put in the spotlight. He's called everything probably than what his name really is. He ran away to another city. What do you think that he wanted more than anything in his life? What do you think? Acceptance. Acceptance. He wanted to be accepted in the family. And look how low down and dirty these people are. You come fight for us, and we'll make you head over us. Now, if that's not acceptance, I don't know what is. I mean, that's ultimately saying we're going to put our stamp of approval on you, and you get to be the leader of your people. Now, remember, it wasn't his people before, but now, this is your people. You could almost hear them saying to him, oh, now, Jephthah, do you really want your people to suffer? Jephthah, do you really want your people to die? Jephthah, think of your father. What would your father want you to do? Why are we here? We're here so we can make you king over us, but you got to do this first. Isn't there always a catch with those kind of things? Now, he's going to go and he's going to fight against these people. Look at verse 12. Jephthah sent messengers to the king to the king of the sons of Ammon, saying, what is between you and me that you've come to me to fight against my land? The king of the sons of Ammon said to the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel took away my land when they came up from Egypt, from the Arnon as far as the Jabbok and the Jordan, therefore return them peaceably now. But Jephthah sent messengers again to the king of the sons of Ammon, and he said to him, thus says Jephthah, that Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of Ammon. For when they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh, Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. And they also sent to the king of Moab, and he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they went through the wilderness and around the land of Edom and the land of Moab and came to the east side of the land of Moab, and they camped beyond the Arnon, but they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the border of Moab. Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land to our place. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people and camped in Jahaz and fought with Israel. The Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites, the inhabitants of that country. They possessed all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon as far as the Jabbok and from the wilderness as far as the Jordan. Since now the Lord, the God of Israel, drove out the Amorites from before his people Israel, are you then to possess it? Do you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives to you to possess? So whatever the Lord our God has driven out before us, we will possess it. Are you any better than Balak, the son of Zappor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive with Israel, or did he ever fight against them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, in the Arior and its villages, and all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not recover them within that time? I therefore have not sinned against you, but you're doing me wrong by making war against me. May the Lord, the judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of Ammon. But the king of the sons of Ammon disregarded the message which Jephthah sent him. Now, this is interesting because everything in our lives is connected to our history. Numbers 21, Jephthah basically is retelling the story that happened in Numbers chapter 21. And here's what he's saying. The reason that they're being attacked is that Ammon is mad that the people of Israel stole their land. Now here's the problem. That's not how it happened. What happened, as Jephthah said, is when the people were coming out of Egypt and they were going to the promised land, they went to 3 different countries and said, hey, it'll make our trip a lot shorter if you let us cut through your country to go to the promised land. That's all we want to do. And so Edom said no. Now Edom is actually a cousin of the Israelites, should have let them through, and they're going to show up later. They said no, so they went around them. And then Moab said no, and they went around them. And they come to the Amorites, and the Amorites said no, but they didn't just say no. Here's what happened. The king said, these people are a threat. And so he gathered his army together and came against the people of Israel. They didn't ask for the fight. They were going around, and so they came, and God delivered the people of Israel from the people of Ammon. In fact, what it says is that they fought together, and God destroyed that army, and he gave them all of that land. Now, after that was 300 and something years, they had an opportunity to get it back. This is what Jephthah says to him, like, why are you now upset? Why all of a sudden now? You had 300 years to do something about this, and you did nothing. Why now? And basically what he tells them is that, look, why are you mad? We've done nothing to you. You're trying to settle an old score that has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with me, has nothing to do with your people and my people. We weren't even around when that happened. Why do we want to fight? Why do we want to fight? Now, unfortunately, this guy, the king of Ammon, was just like his ancestors and the other kings. He didn't listen. Didn't listen to any of that. And so here's what we have happen. They're being attacked for an old grudge that has nothing to do with anybody, and that's really how most wars are. Why are we fighting? Well, your great-granddaddy and my great-granddaddy were mad. I don't really know why they were mad, but they were mad, and he hurt his feelings, and they hurt my feelings, and my feelings are hurt. Now I'm going to fight for him to restore his feeling. He's dead. He's gone. I think his feelings are okay now, right? But that's where we are. And here's the thing. He didn't listen. He didn't listen, so he wants to fight. And so all that happens to set up the worst vow that has ever been made, that hopefully will never be made like this again. Here's what happens. Look at verse 29. After he sent his messengers and they had this back and forth conversation, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah so that he passed through Gilead and Manasseh. He passed through Mizpah of Gilead. From Mizpah of Gilead he went to the sons of Ammon. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So Jephthah crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them. The Lord gave them into his hand. He struck them with a very great slaughter from the Aror to the entrance of the Meninoth, 20 cities as far as Abel-Kerim. So the sons of Ammon were subdued before the sons of Israel. When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with tambourines and dancing. Now she was his one and only child. Besides her, he had no sons and no daughters. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, You have brought me very low, and you are among those who trouble me. Now, that's a great greeting to your daughter who hasn't seen you, who is scared that you might die in war. She comes out, she's dancing, she's got tambourines, and she's probably dressed really pretty, and she comes out, and he was like, oh, you! Why does it have to be you? And he's tearing his clothes, and he was like, you trouble me, and you break my heart. Like, thanks, Dad. That's glad to see you too. So, do what? Like it's her fault. Yeah, like it's her fault. So then he says, I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back. So she said to him, my father, you have given your word to the Lord? Do to me as you have said, since the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the sons of Ammon. She said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go to the mountains and weep because of my virginity, I and my companions. He said, go. So he sent her away for 2 months, and she left with her companions and wept on the mountains because of her virginity. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did to her according to the vow which he had made, and she had no relations with a man. Thus it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year. So can you see why this is the worst and most terrible vow ever made? So here's some things. So again, we're going to work through this and talk about it, because the vow that he made and what it says that he did does not line up with who God is. And so we need to work through this and try to figure out what's really happening here, okay? So the first thing that we see is that God's Spirit came upon him, but he still doubted. Now, we've talked about this before, and this is one of the difficult things that we see in the Old Testament. The Spirit would come on people, but not reside in people. And so that's what happens before Jesus dies on the cross and the Holy Spirit comes as our comforter. The difference that we have now that's so amazing is the Holy Spirit comes to live in us. Cannot be taken away. His power in us cannot be diminished. But what happened with people in the Old Testament, because Christ hadn't died yet, is the Holy Spirit would come to empower them or give them wisdom or help them with a task, but he did not live in them. And so what you'll hear is the Spirit came upon and the Spirit left. I don't even want to imagine what that feeling would be like. And in fact, what we see is sometimes it happened and people didn't realize it. You have King Saul and, the Spirit would come on him and help him do things and win wars and things like that. And then we see the Spirit leaving him. You're going to see it with Samson. He's going to be in chapter 13. When we get to that, we're going to talk about Samson. Spirit would come on him and let him do mighty and wonderful things. And he would leave him. So here's what we happen. He goes and kind of has this parlay with the king of Ammon and tries to negotiate and settle things, which I think is pretty awesome. If he was a gang leader, he wouldn't have done that. Like he wouldn't have gone and reasoned anything or tried to, not start a war. I mean, if he really was somebody who really just loved to fight, he would have been like, okay, let's suit up and go. He didn't do that. He offers a way out for them and for the people. We don't need to fight. Nobody needs to die. Like this is stupid. Let's just not do this. And so he's coming back from that kind of, parlay, and he starts having these doubts and he's having this fear. And so what he does is says, okay, God's Spirit comes on him and kind of empowers him, but he has this moment where he says, okay, I just don't feel really secure in this. I just don't really know if God is going to come through. This should remind us of, Judges chapter 8, where Gideon does this. If you make the fleece dry and the ground wet, if you make the fleece wet and the ground dry, he's testing God. Really, he's not testing God. What he's doing is saying, God, I don't trust you. And this is what we see with Jephthah. So Jephthah does the only thing that he knows to do. And this makes me sad because we see how, he understood God. I mean, you can't recount Numbers 21 without knowing something about who God is. But I think when you see people's character come out when they get in difficult situations, you see what really matters to them. And so here's what he does. I know what I'll do. I will make a vow to God. I'll bind him in a contract, and he'll have to do what I ask him to do. Now, here's the thing. Is that found anywhere in the Old Testament? Is that found anywhere in the New Testament? Can I tell you where that is found? In false idol worship. That was a common practice in idol worship. In fact, what they would tell you is you can manipulate these gods if you promise enough stuff. Now, you don't have to follow through. You just got to promise it. So here's what Jephthah said. Okay, God, here's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to sacrifice to you anything that comes out of my house when I get back from the victory that you give me. Now, I wanted to stop for a second. Why would you say that?
Do you think it was like his dog?
Yeah. Dog, cat, cow, I don't know. I mean, that's super specific, right? I mean, it can only be one of two things, his wife or his daughter.
Tambourine came out first.
Tambourine came out, yeah. Maybe he had slaves. Maybe it was a slave. Don't know. But here's what he does. Like, this is the craziest vow. But before we get too hard on him, don't we do the same thing? God, if you do this, then I'll read my Bible every day for an hour and a half. God, if you do this, I promise I'll never miss church ever again. God, if you do this, I'll stop drinking. God, if you do this, I'll stop this. God, if you do this, I will change. I promise. I promise, I promise, I promise. What's our track record on the promises and fulfilling those promises? We're a perfect zero. We are consistently zero. But this is what he does. Okay, I'm scared. I don't know how this is going to work. And so I need to do what I know to do. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a deal with God. Now, here's the question I want to put before you.